We're the two teachers. Welcome to Citizen U.
LIVEstyle. Tonight, we're reviewing Congress.
Say, guys, Congress is really about you. Our Congress is about representing the people. Our government is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. No better place to learn that than learning about Congress.
Well, I was wondering about Congress. Could you tell me a little bit about the committees and how they play a role in the legislative process?
Because that really is the key to the legislative process. It's also the key to what we call congressional oversight. Committees are places where representatives in the House or senators in the Senate specialize in a particular policy area. Maybe it's agriculture, maybe it's education, maybe it's finance. If a bill comes to Congress that particularly relates to the financial system, it's going to go to committees where experts review that legislation, they mark it up, and it's reviewed by these specialists. If there's a part of the bureaucracy that's in charge of implementing a law, let's say it's implementing the Safe Food Act, committees committed to safe food, for instance, agriculture or health and nutrition, they're going to review the work of bureaucracy to oversee the implementation of that law. And again, it's done by committee members who have an expertise in that policy area.
As the old line goes, clearly Congress at work is Congress in committee. It's where they become specialists. But there are three different kinds of committees, and it probably would be wise to know what those committees are. The standing committees are permanent. So if you're a member of Congress, you get appointed to a committee, and you might be on that same committee 4, 5, 6 different terms. You could be on that same committee your whole life. You're an expert. That's a standing committee. Then we have what's called a conference committee. A conference committee is that only time where the members of the House and the Senate work together. In the conference committee, they try to reconcile the differences between a bill that's passed in the House and a bill that's passed in the Senate. And then occasionally we see those committees that are known as select committees. Maybe we have an issue in the country that, do we deal with health care? Let's form a select committee, invite members of Congress, and study that. It doesn't have a legislative role, it's just kind of a research role. But I would say those three committees, if you really want to know how Congress works, don't go to the floor of the House or the Senate, go into the committee rooms.
And Rebecca, don't forget majority rules, because whatever party controls the majority of that chamber controls the majority on each of the committees in that chamber. And so that allows the majority party in that chamber to set the agenda, because that majority on that committee can decide these are the issues we want to address in this term of Congress.
So now that we've talked a little bit about the legislative process, how exactly does a bill get introduced?
A bill gets introduced by any member of Congress. So tax laws, the Constitution says tax laws have to start in the House of Representatives. So a representative would have to introduce that piece of legislation in the House. Or if you're going to start a piece of legislation in the Senate, a senator would have to introduce it.
But remember, Carter, that idea for that legislation can start right here at this table tonight. Members of Congress represent us, and so they may have to introduce the bill, but it would not be unusual for you to write a bill. It would not be unusual, Rebecca, for an interest group that you're a member of to say, hey, we're really passionate about this topic, to write a bill and submit it to your member of Congress, and they will submit it into the legislative process. But the legislative process is slow. Clearly, those that oppose a bill have the advantage, because every step along the way there's a hurdle or an obstacle. But this is the way the framers had it in mind. They didn't want a government that could just pass anything, anytime on a whim. So oftentimes we, the people, look at our Congress and say, boy, it's the do-nothing Congress. It doesn't work. The framers would be smiling. Whew! It wasn't supposed to work smoothly. We don't want laws to pass unless they're absolutely necessary.
But they'd also be smiling because the process works similar to what they envisioned with the cup and the saucer. Remember, the House is the cup. Legislation tends to go a little bit more quickly through the House because the majority rules in the House. There are fewer ways to delay legislation in the House versus the Senate, because the Senate was supposed to be more deliberative, because there are more tools to slow a bill down, like the filibuster in the Senate process typically takes much longer.
So when we talk about the Senate as cooling down bills, how has the Senate changed over the years? Because I think in class you might have mentioned
yes. Well, the Senate used to be more the elite chamber. remember, the Senate was not originally elected by the people. They were appointed, they were the upper house, appointed by their own state legislatures or governors. But now that they've been directly elected by the 17th Amendment, they seem to reflect very similarly the way the House reflects. And so they've got a little bit different constituency base. But we also know the Senate plays by different rules. And the rules of the Senate right now allow them to do something called the filibuster. Boy, is this entertaining for those of us back home. Because the filibuster allows someone like a Ted Cruz maybe to halt the business of the Senate, stand up in front of the mic, in front of the cameras, and just delay a vote. Whereas the majority party in the House passes things quickly, the Senate has different rules, less strict rules, and allows things like the filibuster, which really throw a wrench in the legislative
The
process.
Senate also debates typically with an open rule, which allows any senator to offer a floor amendment during floor debate, and that can really slow down the legislative process. The House usually debates with what's called a closed rule, which limits putting floor amendments on the bill, and when you limit floor amendments, it speeds the process up.
Could you talk a little bit about the oversight and gerrymandering?
Well,
Gerrymandering.
some of my favorite topics have just been mentioned. Where to start? Remember, the House of Representatives is determined by population. Populations change.
Largest states have the most representatives.
And so every 10 years, according to the Constitution, a census is taken. Let's count the people. And we've got to apportion and then redistrict. Reapportion means, wait a minute, your state's lost population relative to the state next door. You don't get as many representatives in Congress in the next 10 years. That's reapportion. Redistrict, now I got to change the lines. We no longer have the same congressional districts. When you draw those lines to favor one political party over another, that's called gerrymandering. I call it political skullduggery. When you draw the lines to benefit you, the party, not we, the voter, to me that sounds like they've chosen us and we haven't chosen them. Gerrymandering is a topic we can't lose sight of.
But usually, Congress doesn't gerrymander, Rebecca. Remember, it's state governments that gerrymander, and different state governments can come up with different systems. But the level of Congress, the number of representatives in the House is fixed at 435. We know the number of senators is fixed at 2 per state or 100. But it's only in the House that we gerrymander. We typically do it every 10 years.
So it sounds like the Congress has a lot of power. How exactly does Congress check other branches of government, and how does it get checked itself?
Checks and balances. Well, we know that the framers wanted checks and balances and a separation of powers. We know they separated Congress with a bicameral legislature, where the House has power over taxes, as we said earlier. The Senate gets to approve treaties and gets to approve the president's appointments. So that would be one way of checking the president's power, and the Senate has a lot of power there. The House could always impeach the president or federal judges, and then the Senate can kick those federal officers out with an impeachment trial.
You've been reviewing Congress. We're the two teachers. No fancy words,
No fancy suits,
plain talk about issues you need to know.
just in time.